Thanks for joining this webinar. I'm going to walk through 4 frameworks for extracting insight from awareness, attitude, and usage data to help build organization or brand strategy. As we go, type any questions you have into GoToWebinar. I'll aim to address those at the end. And later in the week, we'll send you a link to a video of this webinar. I'm going to be showing everything in Displayr, but the steps can also be done in Q research, with one small exception, which I'll point out on the way through. But all the principles are applicable regardless of which software you use. A quick Google search reveals there's lots of definitions of U&A research out there. To cater for many of those definitions, I'll describe it as usually a large scale survey, both in length and number of respondents, containing generalized measures of the category in question and the brands within it, using analysis to understand the relationships between knowledge or attitude and targeted behaviors, and with the overall aim of reviewing and informing strategy. Now for focus today, we're going to concentrate on those general measures and touch briefly on the topics only of segmentation, driver analysis, and mapping, maybe a little bit more mapping than the other two. Our current webinar series has detailed content in each of these other areas. You can find this on our website, and I'll also leave you with those links at the end. It's fair to say that U&A research can be challenging from my experience, just for a number of reasons. Unlike, say, ad testing or new product development, the U&A brief can lack focus, may simply ask to please tell us everything we need to know about our market. U&As can be expensive, usually triggered by an event such as a decline in sales or a new CMO arriving. There's lots of expectation. If you take many measures multiplied by many thousands of respondents, it means a large volume of data to wade through. So it can be hard to know where or how to begin. In a short webinar, we're not going to prepare a full U&A report. However, we recommend working through these 4 key analysis frameworks to get everything off to a good start and give you the confidence to move forward. We'll work through each framework and see how they build the foundations for a strategic outcome. Firstly, competitive market structure. Here we want to know who we most compete with as a brand, and this tells us the true market that we're in. We want to know something about the nature of that competition as well, the territories or platforms that we're operating in. The data requirements for this typically a matrix of brands by brands, such as a switching matrix, or brands by attributes. I generally prefer attributes that tells us something about how the brands are competing. We don't have to kind of make it up from what we know about the brands. Once we've got the data in that form, we can map it. We can enhance the map by overlaying, say, share and growth numbers, which we'll do today. And then we can locate our brand, classify those primary and secondary competitors, where is the opportunity, and for each of those groups, start to think about what they have in common. That's what we mean by market structure. So first data requirement is a brand attribute grid in our case. We're going to have the brands in the rows here for a specific reason, which I'll talk about. And for today's exercise, we also want tables showing market share of each brand and the change in market share over time. So we use these dynamic elements in our decision making. Let's now create that market map and explore the competitive market structure. So we're going to use correspondence analysis. And I should find my brand attributes table that I showed before, set here at the top of the list. It's pretty busy at the moment, so just bear with me, I'll tidy up the labeling. I think we can lose those grid lines as well. All right, so it's a number of steps we can go through here. The first one is to set the normalization to row principal scales. This ensures the map most accurately shows the relationships between the brands, which is the item we have in our rows. Now let's add the market share, and we'll use the bubble sizes for that. So we need to switch to bubble chart. Just type in a few letters, we can find our market share. So there's the bubbles, and we're going to make the colors to reflect the change in market share. So the default is blue for positive and red for negative. Set the midpoint to 0. Better put a title in for the legend, in case anyone's looking at this later. Okay, so you see some of the brands are in blue, meaning that they're growing. I would generally want those to be at the top of the map, so it's more communicative in terms of growth and heading north. So down here, there's an option to flip vertically, which I'll take. This is a fake data set with fictitious fast food brands. Today, we're going to assume we're working on behalf of Burger Chef. So we have a small problem. And the brand we care about most is kind of hard to see sitting here in this group. The first thing we can try is to rotate the correspondence map to focus on a particular brand and maximize its explanation. So here in this focus box, we just type in the label. That's a little bit better, but we probably still need to do more. So we can experiment with removing what we think might be an outlier attribute. So I might pick on healthy food options, might have been ambitious in a fast food survey anyway. So we'll go back to my brand attribute grid, find it here, and delete that. If I've made a mistake, I can always get that back by resetting the table. So that's looking better, and we're getting better separation of the brands. And we made that change, but we don't want to lose that insight. So I think these brands were stronger and healthy, so we'll just add a text box. Now let's work out what the rest of it is telling us. You can see here that Burger Chef is mostly in the convenience space. There's quite a few attributes relating to convenience down here. Burger Chef also stretches into this territory, so out of those main brands, it's the one that competes most here, and this looks like it's all about restaurant quality. Over here, we have some brands that seem to be more focused on food quality. Might be more expensive, perhaps. And down here, there's a couple of brands really focused on value. Okay, so we're now starting to get more structure. Burger Chef's tier 1 competitors are Arnold's and Southern Fried Chicken. They're most strongly competing in terms of convenience. And as the 3 biggest players, this is the core market. Looks like this territory is declining a bit, but it's the source of market share right now, so it's very important to us short term. Interestingly, some of these adjacent brands are static or growing. They're more oriented towards restaurant quality, food quality, so perhaps we're seeing a longer term shift in the market, so something to keep an eye on. So this tells us a lot. We can use this as a guidepost, but as correspondence analysis reduces things to 2 dimensions, we recommend always checking the source data to validate our conclusions and maybe tell us a bit more detail. I'm going to find my brand attributes variable. Because I used it for the map, I'm going to duplicate it. And I can find it up here. This time I'm going to put the brands at the top just to read down the columns, and I might just, hopefully you can still see it if I reduce it to 9, get a bit more on there. Now the significant results are all highlighted, so blue's higher than expected, red lower. We can automatically sort the table to show those patterns more clearly. So we right click and find the sort. There's an option here for categories in the columns, and we're going to sort by pattern rather than alphabetical. And lo and behold, you can see it's basically given us the same market structure as the map. So the 3 brands here are together, that's tier 1, then our tier 2 brands are next nearest competitors are here. Let's do the same with the rows. So automatically sort by pattern. Of course, once this is done, we can drag and drop the rows around if we want to. You see we're getting a bit of diagonalization here in terms of the highlighted results. So we can see if Arnold's is the leader, we're a bit behind in terms of drive-through service and speed. We're a bit behind in terms of convenient opening hours. So there's things we can work on short term. What's interesting is that Burger Chef, our brand, is probably the one out of these top brands that has the best competitive potential with some of these second tier brands when it comes to restaurant quality. So we do as well or better in terms of appealing decor and nice looking restaurants. So it looks like we got our core strategy of convenience, but we need to keep an eye out on perhaps a segment that's interested in the restaurant experience. Let's now check in with our most valuable consumers. So knowing what market we're competing in, and that's key, we've taken the insight from the first stage, built it in here. Who are we selling to in this market? What consumers or customers need to be the center of our strategic thinking? There's many different ways to do this. I think the most common one would be volume or value contribution to the category. So we're going to focus on that. We're going to use some histogram to check the distribution of behavior. We'll try cart to see if we can find a demographic center. Otherwise, we'll create a simple behavioral segmentation and see what we can learn from that. So we need to start by finding a variable that measures volume of consumption. So in my datasets tree here, there's one called number of times for each brand in the last month. It's a numeric variable, it's indicated here. So it makes sense to focus on the market as defined by our tier 1 and tier 2 competitors to keep the funnel fairly wide. So I'll select those brands. Because they're numeric, I can go to the calculation menu up here and easily sum them. And then I can give it a sensible name. All right, so let's take a look at that. Let's give us an average of 4.9. That seems pretty high without really knowing the exact sample composition here. Let's check out the distribution. So we can find histogram is probably the most logical. You can see here there's a long tail of consumption, mostly centered around the average here of 4.9. I guess some consumers could visit for coffee, lunch, snacking, and come more than once a day to all the different options. But let's cap it at 50 occasions so we can keep a lid on that extreme behavior. It's an important part of kind of cleaning data. So if you've used the capping function before, you just need to type in the top box to find out where it is. The search box, sorry. And the yellow path leads me to recode. I don't want to take the option of recoding the high value and set it at 50. So hopefully that'll be a bit more sensible. So a good technique to find the demographic center of a category is cart or classification and regression trees. It's in this advanced analysis machine learning menu. So in the inputs, I need to just select my total. And for my predictors, I'm going to just focus on the task of looking for demographic predictors at the moment, usually at the top and the bottom of a data file. Okay, so we get a tree visualization. We can see that the best predictor, or the only predictor really, is age, with the heavier users shown in blue. It's given a higher mean score versus the others. So people under 35 are more inclined to use the category than people over 35. So reasonable insight, but not that helpful really in terms of the magnitude of that difference and the fact that by taking out age, it's really ignored these other variables. So if I was doing this, I'd probably park that as a broad insight and then find a better way to understand category consumption. Now, because I've used that in the tree, I'm going to just swap that out for a copy of that variable. So in the properties tab here, Displayr will allow us to set some histogram categories. So we can set equal proportions. And it'll do its best to find three roughly equal categories across the distribution. Now you can actually resize those categories by dragging the red bar. This is monthly data. I guess a range of 3 to 5 is roughly once a week. So I'm kind of happy with that. And then I've got a lower frequency group and a higher frequency group. So I'm going to accept those defaults and work with this first. By taking that option, it's added a variable down here at the end of the file. So I'm just going to rename that. And we'll take a look at it. And I'm going to want to make the labeling more useful to us as well. Just bear with me. Okay, so we got 29% of our population are in this sort of high 6 or more occasions per month group. Let's duplicate that table. That gives us the population distribution, but we're going to want to know the volume distribution as well. So I can find my variable, bring it in here. This is a numeric. Now it's defaulted to average, but I can easily change that to share contribution over here. Okay, so then we get this, not quite an 80-20 rule, but 20-80 rule, but we've got this insight where 29%, the most valuable 29% of consumers account for 62% of the occasions. And if you net those two together, which we can do, you get around 63%, accounting for 89% of the entire category. So it sort of begs the question then that we need to know those heavy users a bit more. And usually we would default to using perhaps crosstabs for that. So let's try that and add a bit of value on the way through. So we insert, I can find a little report option down here, and there's an option to add some crosstabs. So I'm going to keep it broad. I'll take the demographics again. I won't do anything brand specific at the moment. There is a broad attitudes to the category variable, which could be interesting, and I'll take the rest of the demographics. So these are in my rows. And I'm going to use the behavioral segments that we just created as our window or column view. So if you're using Displayr, you have a little report tree here. You can hide these if you don't want to include them in any outputs. Now, a really cool feature is the ability to sort these in terms of their significance or predictive value. So if you select them, right-click, find the sort option, you can sort those pages by significance. It's a very handy feature. It focuses on where the action is in the data, and it gives us confidence when we start to build conclusions. I would always start trying to learn things where the data relationships are the strongest. So we can see here, for example, that heavy users are significantly skewed towards males. Not dramatic, but significantly. There tend to be single people under 40, and kind of like we saw with the Sankey diagram, you can see here there's a peak in that sort of 19 to 29 age group for the heavy users. So we start to get a bit of a profile. What's really interesting though is that by far, attitudes to the category is a better predictor of behavior. So it's not about who I am, it's more about what I think or what my lifestyle is like, as you'll see. So there's the source table. This is a 5-point scale, classic 5-point agreement scale. So these are mean scores. like we did earlier, we should select the table and rearrange it to show the patterns. We're structuring the table. And because it's mean scores, we may want to make it align with everything else and convert it to percentages. So we just find the variable down here. It's currently numeric, but we can change it to binary. Displayr will prompt us to make sure we're happy with how it's calculating those percentages. Those relationships look pretty strong to me, so I might try the top box first. So this is pretty cool. I think we got a loose demographic profile, but we've got a really strong attitudinal profile, a lifestyle profile. Looks like heavy usage is less about classic things like comfort or reward, a lot more about convenience in the context of a busy lifestyle and people replacing meals with quick service kind of stuff when the value equation is right. So we can bank that insight and keep going. Okay, so now we know which competitors and which consumers we need to focus on. Our next framework helps us work out what to do, specifically what customer-centric goals we need to set and how we might go about actioning those goals. So here we're going to use classic brand health data and overlay a bit of market share data as well. Again, I think having that outcome variable just adds weight to anything you try to look for. We're going to take that and build a summary matrix of the brand health information. We're going to convert it to a purchase funnel and calculate the conversion rates. Once we have all that information and we rank it on market share, we can identify the metrics that describe differences in share, and that'll help us select which goals to use. I'm sure these will be familiar. Most consumer behavior or business decision-making processes can be represented as funnels, different level, different stages. The idea is calculate conversion rates. So here there's a 90% conversion between your last trip and being a loyal supermarket shopper to a particular brand. Here in B2B software sales, there's a 25% conversion from getting onto the CRM and receiving a demo. So I think the key to performing an effective analysis is to compare these conversion rates. You compare them over time against benchmarks, or mostly against competitors, which is what we're going to do. And what we mean by customer-centric goal setting is just that, expressing goals in consumer terms that ladder to a specific marketing action. So you can see brand A in this example has got a very skinny funnel. It's just got a raw awareness problem, so it needs to improve its salience. Brand B, by comparison, it only converts 41% from awareness to trial versus 75% for the market leader. So it's got a bit of work to do to either grow distribution or improve its value proposition. And so forth. We get down to here to say brand E, where its conversion rate is 55% between preference and market share, which is last occasion, I think, in this case, well behind the market leader. So somehow we've got to improve the consumption rate or purchase frequency, perhaps finding new occasions for this brand to tap into. All right, as I said, one of the key requirements here is a brand health matrix. So I think at the bottom of this page, I've got tables already set up for awareness, trial, consider, and last, just to pick a few key ones. Because we've got the insight about which brands compete with which, we can adjust, say, this last occasion, which is our de facto market share measure, to reflect that. So I'm going to take any brand that's not a direct competitor, and hide them. So at least one of these tables is now a short list. Displayr has a built-in specialty table called the brand health table to bring those measures all into one place. Just giving us a note that we need to find some inputs. We go here, here's a list of tables. I think we should be able to find, here's our awareness, ever eaten, and consider input tables. There's options here if we want to customize the names here to suit a particular consumer behavior model. So we can just type in where, trial. And it's showing the stages in the funnel at the moment. We probably want to sort that by share, as I said before. And I'm going to set these as bars. Okay, so here's our basic brand health matrix. Now, we've got the insight on heavy category users and how important they are in the volume they contribute. So it's probably worth checking in with them when we do analysis like this. So I'll go back to my source tables down here. And I'm going to create a filter to isolate those heavy users. That's going to come from our behavioral segments. So it's added to the top here. We just need to relocate that. And we can isolate heavy users, and all the tables below in this brand health matrix will update. I don't think it changed that much, but it's really good comfort to know that we're checking in with the most important consumers in the category when we do anything like this. And so that we can use this for other analyses, we can make it a special page default to include that filter. So I'll temporarily remove it from here, go to my page master up here. I've got a page master set up to have my control box. So I can use this page layout now, just as I would in PowerPoint, to add value to any of the analyses. So if we go to the Burger Chef conversion funnel now, if we want to bring this to life in a nicer way, you can see my control boxes there. Now, at the moment, this is just the same theoretical examples that I used earlier on when we were talking about goal setting. We can go over here and find our recently created brand health grid and update it for our core competitors. And I should point out as well that because I truncated that table, it's really only selected the brands that are in common across those 4 tables, which is what we want. These are our main competitors and our secondary competitors here. If we're going to compare our conversion rates and scores, then I'm recommending that they're the brands we want to compare ourselves to. So what does Burger Chef have to do? We can see here amongst our valuable consumers, its awareness levels are pretty high, so we can't improve that. The trial rate's also quite high, so we can't find new consumers. So that's kind of 2 broad insights. We go back to our input. It's currently set to show the stages in the funnel, but I can flip that to just showing conversion rates or both the stages and conversion rates. I'll just do conversion. Because there's only 3 rows here now, it's defaulted alphabetical, but I still want to sort it so I can read from left to right. And now it gets a bit more interesting. So conversion from trial to consider, it's a little bit weaker for Burger Chef versus these other leading brands. And there's a couple of the smaller brands encroaching. So that's something we may want to look at. But the bigger issue for Burger Chef is it's well behind the market leader in terms of converting consideration. You know, we've got people interested, but we haven't got them to try us. So really, our first priority should be to increase our rate of purchase, which leads us to our next and final framework. We call this the demand creating conditions. What things lead to a successful sales outcome for our category or our brand? Most U&A studies contain a lot of detail on purchase or consumption, often referred to as the 5 W's. So I think it's who, what, where, when, and why. The key here is to prioritize these based on how well they predict behavior. In this case, our recent usage target. So we're going to use the crosstab routine that we saw earlier to get our priorities or predictors. And then we're going to use scatter plots to create some importance performance maps. I'm sure everyone knows the basic idea of importance performance. You work out what is valuable to people, you work out how we perform, and you want a lot of things in the top here. And if you don't, then the first thing to focus on is important stuff that we don't do so well. So what's our target variable? Well, we could choose an individual brand. I think it's better to be a bit broader than that, but still to limit the alternative. So I've taken that recent order list and I've recreated it to reflect our market structure. So if I hover over here, you can see that the three main brands in convenience are Burger Chef, Southern Fried Chicken, and Arnold's as before. That was just selecting these from the table and using this combine function here and repeating that for the other categories. Let's find our crosstab report again. All right. So we'll keep it broad with demographics, but we also want to go into that 5W area. So in this questionnaire, it's all this section C. So I'll grab all them. And then I'll keep a few demographics as well. And this time my lens is going to be the structured version of my most recent order. So I think we'll find that there's going to be more tables here than last time. So it's even more important to do a bit of organizing here to set us up for some good analysis. So I'll select them all, right click again, sort pages by significance. So that's going to give me the power to start from top to bottom in my learning process. And if I think that's too many, and I've had obviously trees which are much longer than this, you can actually prune it. So you can go up here to delete. Oops, I didn't select them all. To here to delete, and you can choose to exclude things that are not significant relationships at a certain level. So I'll just take the midpoint here, 99%. It's at least going to get rid of a couple of tables for me that are superfluous to this task. So I think the more focus you have, the better analysis you're going to get. Let's take a quick look at these sort of higher ranking ones. So we can see here that if someone was alone, there's a skew towards our convenience occasion, but dining with others is still, or eating with others is still very strong for that occasion. Let's tidy that label up as well. We go for occasion. You can see here that there's lots of occasions popping on this convenience sector. So it means that it's relevant throughout the day. Even dinner being lower than average is still quite significant. We kind of already know that for convenience that having a good drive-through and handy restaurants is important, different to some of these other events. And we can see here that a food type ordered, that convenience is also probably the strongest variety seeking occasion. So all these are very good insights to have when we build our strategy to own more of the convenience sector. One thing that's really interesting in this exercise is that when you flip to demographics, it's actually the second tier, the restaurant experience sector, which pops very heavily on a particular location, so Northeast. So it seems like where most of that activity is happening. And I guess if we're going to compete with those brands at a secondary level, then it gives us clear indication of where we perhaps need to build our nicest or flagship restaurants. And when I was looking at this earlier, I also noticed that we know age is kind of important in the background, but it's actually more important to that restaurant experience group as well. So you can see the young adults kind of looking for that restaurant experience at that time in their life kind of makes sense to me. Right, so to bring that to life, we've got our priorities now, we've got a bit of insight on the detail, but we need to create our important performance maps. So I've got that kind of set up here. We've got our filter ready to go. We can start with looking at the total sample. If you recall, occasion was one of our key predictors, so I've set up those tables here. So that's the straight numbers on occasion. I think I have to make sure they're connected to that filter because they were set up beforehand. So there we go. Now this is a little filter called, another filter variable called Burger Chef chose. So it's row percentages. So what this represents is its share on each of those occasions. So Burger Chef has 14% share of breakfast, 12% share of lunch, and so forth. And because we want to use these as coordinates in a scatter plot, we just need to hide that column so it knows which one to take for the y-axis. So by hiding in Displayr, you retain the sample size and the numbers. If we deleted that data, then these would change to, I guess, 100% in this case. And then just start building the importance performance stuff, we would find scatter plot and labeled scatter. And locate it, and then we'd find our occasion table and so forth. Now it's going to take a little while to set up the variables and label and the quadrants and all those sorts of things. So I actually did that earlier. So we've got our ranking of predictors. Now this is where it gets interesting from an analysis point of view. So here's our grid for occasions. So we've got the dinner occasion being very high. We're not doing so well as Burger Chef on that occasion. Do okay at lunch, and there's these incidental occasions. So theoretically, you might sort of think, well, over investing here, and we need to do better and apply some of those funds to improving our performance at dinner. This is a good example where we should check in with our heavy users so we can filter them in. And what actually happens when you focus on that highly valuable segment is that lunch drops here. It indicates that there's more heavy users having lunch, which is that busy lifestyle factor, I think. And also because they're valuable, there's more competitors competing for that occasion. So we have to work harder to improve our lunch performance for that core user category. Now, like I said, it probably took me maybe 2 minutes to get this and get the boxes in place and shade the colors and this sort of thing to reflect the map. Once it's done though, when you use software like Displayr, you can duplicate what you've got and then just quickly hook it up to other things. So all we need to do is find our source tables, find the rows, and we know that food is C11. And bang, there it is. We've got our grid for food. And we can see here that because we're Burger Chef, we do okay beef burgers, but we want to improve our fries offering. It's pretty popular. And if we deal with those two things, then maybe chicken burgers is the next cab off the rank for our heavy users. We duplicate it again. Find our inputs. And I think we saw in our predictors that who I'm with was kind of important. C5. And the table, the chart changes instantly. So Burger Chef does okay at the niche on my own occasion, doesn't do so well when dining with others. It might be related to the dinner insight from earlier. So very rapidly, once we've got something set up, we can get to a point of learning a lot of things about our opportunity when we've got this dependent variable of driving occasions and we're focusing on our brand. I should point out that this control box is the only thing you can't really do in Q that easily because it's more in sync with Displayr's dashboarding capabilities. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, we're not quite there with the full report, but by applying these 4 frameworks, we've set up a lot of learnings about Burger Chef, their position in the market and what they need to do to improve. And really taking out my intro, it's been all done in around 30 minutes. Using the philosophy of a data-driven approach, as we've been doing, where each step informs the next, you could use these as, say, interim conclusions and then investigate further. Like we focused on the 5 Ws here to see how we can drive short-term occasions, but you might choose to conduct a driver analysis on improving things long-term, using consideration as your dependent variable. Or we could do a deeper dive on lunch and dinner to see how they're different and make sure we're optimizing our activities against those 2 occasions. I guess the key message today is that a structured, data-driven approach to the analysis can get you off to a flying start and with confidence. As I mentioned earlier, for those that missed it, there are webinar recordings available on our website in these related areas: segmentation, driver analysis, and mapping. Goes into a lot more technical detail on mapping and driver analysis than we did today. And as I said, we'll email you a recording of this webinar shortly. If there's any more questions, type them in. There's a couple there. Thanks for joining us. If you're one of our customers, we thank you for your support and hope you learned something new today, even from a theoretical point of view. And if you're not a customer and you're interested to know more, you can download a free version of apply for a free account on our website, and you can also book a tailored demo. Got a question here. A couple of times we use market share information in our analysis. Is there a way to get that in if it's not in the survey? Yes, of course there is. So if we add a page and you've got something sitting in Excel, for example, or some other report, we can go table. And we can paste it in. Another question on driver analysis. Like I said, probably the best thing, can we elaborate? The best thing to suggest there is, well, it's actually another version of what we looked at here, importance and performance. So the idea would be you would take a dependent variable, you might take brand attributes, you look at the contribution of a brand attribute rating to, say, consideration as the importance score, and then the brand's relative score on those attributes here. You know, with something a similar framework in terms of that importance performance grid. Lawrence asked a question about discussing cart analysis, how it could have been used in more detail. I think it's just one of those things where the data didn't support something kind of more interesting. I kind of like it as a predictive tool. And there are other tools in this advanced analysis menu here, which we could have tried as well. So we could have taken our behavioral segments, for example, and tried a mixed mode tree as another way of trying to find the truth in terms of splits. And I will check, Lauren, if there is actually webinar content on that area. I'm reasonably certain there would be. If not, I'm sure it's a great topic for a future webinar and how you would choose between those different options. All right, that looks like it for the questions. So thank you a lot for your time. Again, hope everybody learned something. And if you're interested in factor analysis, please join our webinar next week.